When it comes to the Christian faith, Castlevania is one of the few mediums I can recall that doesn't go out of its way to overtly glorify the faith. At the same time, it never at any point intentionally demonized the faith, and I found nothing wrong with that from a writing standpoint, as the focus was first and foremost about a vampire hunter seeking to stop Dracula. In regards to the weakness of the monsters, Castlevania drew its early inspiration from works like Bram Stoker's Dracula and the Hammer horror films, as well as Indiana Jones and Conan the Barbarian for the hero in order to set him apart. It also adhered to the ways a vampire can be killed. This includes holy and religious relics like the crucifix and the holy water. Later down the line, as Castlevania develops its lore, more monsters and creatures of other religions and mythologies got added. Now one can argue that the relics of the Christian faith won't work on, let's say for example, a Dirge, which is of the Hindu faith, or the Medusa of Greek mythos. Fair enough, even shows like Supernatural ran with the idea where different monsters and spirits have different weaknesses. Now it may vary between the original games, the Eager timeline, or even Lords of Shadow, but regardless of the preference, vampires in the Castlevania lore as a whole always feared the holy relics from the Christian faith, partially due to the Bram Stoker influence as well as the religious and supernatural aspect which is also part of Castlevania's lore. Now here's where I dig a bit into one of my own fan theories. Because the Belmonts made their name on hunting creatures of the night and monsters of every sort, they would have learned of other mythologies and faiths and knew some of their relics and such that are forbidden in their own faith. Hence, part of why we have things like the bestiary where the monsters are recorded along with their habits, strengths and how to beat them. We know according to the canon that the townspeople wanted the Belmonts gone from Wallachia because they came to fear them as well as their superhuman powers. The idea of them delving into powers and knowledge of foreign faiths that goes against theirs would add to that fears and whispers of their prowess, whereas in reality they were no more than a means to an end in slaying monsters. Now an even more outlandish fan theory of mine would have the more superstitious and religiously devout believing the rumors that the Belmonts are spies for the Ottoman Empire. Perhaps even add all of these fan theories on some level into the canon and it would paint a picture as to why the Belmonts had to leave Wallachia. The Eastern Orthodox Church, or simply known as the Church in Castlevania, would be one of Wallachia's defenders in place of the Belmonts. This is more so the case when Dracula started his invasion. When they've exhausted all their options, the Church turned to the Belmont clan as their last hope, as Dracula's army was obliterating them battle after battle. It was after Trevor ended Dracula himself that the Church kept close ties with the Belmonts and other prominent hunters of their like over the centuries. In most cases, the Church in Castlevania usually aided the heroes, but they would over the centuries most likely maintain a more neutral business approach to their dealings. Now taken as a whole, one can argue that they are not altruistically good. This argument can also be applied to any religion, government, organization, business, and so on, as it also boils down to the people who make up these organizations. But in the world of Castlevania, they are actually meant to be a competent organization that would place the interests of mankind above their own. Especially when a world-ending threat like Dracula nearly brought Europe to its end, and even still, said threat looms over them due to the inevitable century cycle of Dracula's resurrection. Not to mention the legions of followers who would even ensure his return before his time. The Eastern Orthodox faith was more prominent in Wallachia, where the story of Castlevania 3 takes place. Now I'm far from a learned man when it comes to the details on established religions like the Catholic and so on. All I can tell you is that the Christian faith went through a great schism and branched out into different denominations over the centuries. As such, you get several fundamental differences between faiths like the Protestant, Catholic and Orthodox for example. This much should have been common knowledge for everyone, and yet Warren Ellis, Eddie Shankar and Netflix went out of their way to get this detail wrong. Now I come across statements like it's anti-religion, not anti-Christian, yet at the same time I sense an intentional bias to disregard the writer and company who have both made their stance very clear and haven't the decency to refrain from inserting their politics and world views into a story that runs antithetical to their own. Yes, the Roman Catholics were prominent in parts of Europe during the 15th century onwards. No, they were not in Wallachia as it was still predominantly Eastern Orthodox. Warren Ellis altered this due to his own hatred for Christianity and Catholicism. Did they burn people for heresy? Keep in mind that heresy was not limited to just practicing science as the writing of this show would have people believe. My answer: without defending or demonizing the Catholic faith, what I will say is that people tend to either overlook or disregard the fact that the Catholic at some point had close ties with nobility and government due to how widespread they've become. The burnings and witch hunts was also done for political reasons due to the close ties they were keeping. When you also factor in the involvement of politics, nobility and government, it gets even messier with different interests now involved. With that being said, anyone who knows Warren Ellis and his prior works will know that this show was just a vehicle to insert his beliefs on how blanket evil the church is. I have 4 examples that immediately come to mind. 1. The complete alteration to Cypher's backstory. This is to divorce her completely from the church so that Alice can make them cartoon villains. 2. The church killing Dracula's wife. Any self-proclaimed Castlevania fan will know that this was not so in the law. 3. The blatant omission of Rosalie. In a different time, I would have rather have her over some no-name priest that the writer tossed in to give easily impressionable people the idea that he's unbiased. But judging by Warren's juvenile writing, I'm actually grateful in hindsight she was never added. 4. That obnoxious explanation for why vampires fear the cross was due to some geometrical shapes or such nonsense. Can he be any more obvious at this point? Regardless of how one feels on a religion or faith, no writer worth his salt would ever do this. And for the record, I find cartoon evil religious organizations lacking any nuance, rather dull and quite boring in and of itself. At the risk of repeating myself here, the Catholic Church themselves were never in Wallachia during 1476. That's just on the historical side of things. Not to mention that the show's writer blatantly disregarded the Castlevania law, where the church themselves were the ones who called on the Belmonts when all the other options failed. Even before that, I strongly speculate that they were most likely the ones who reached out to Alucard for help, but Alucard would not aid them unless they can get the Belmonts to join the cause, as he knew how powerful his father really was. If not, their cause was doomed. Even before that, it was Grant Dynasty who led the rebellion against Dracula in the beginning of the war. You know, the one character Warren Ellis cut for petty reasons, yet he gave us Clownbrand, Pointless Vampire Lesbians 1 and 2, Vile Creature, and the embodiment of a middle finger to fans of Grant Dynasty. The church in the law were the ones who shielded Cypher from the witch hunts, as they knew something was amiss, as well as realizing that they made a mistake in allowing the Belmonts to be exiled. These details would also explain why she is in their service as both their agent and as a hunter of monsters. But the writer, however, was more interested in painting them as the ones responsible for the near extinction of the Belmont clan, of which I can find zero evidence of, even in the lore. Not to mention them hunting Cypher's group, another alteration solely made for the show. For those who do not know, it was the townspeople who were manipulated into the witch hunts that was happening all over Europe. The mastermind behind this was none other than Carmilla herself, at either the behest or approval of Dracula himself. The reason for this, based on one fan theory, and dear viewers, you are welcome to correct me if this is somewhere in the canon that I may have missed, is that Dracula saw the spellcasters like Cypher as a threat to him due to their magical abilities and allowed Carmilla to orchestrate the witch hunts. If, and I strongly emphasize on if here, we are to acknowledge Sonia in the canon, then based on this past encounter, Dracula also knew firsthand how much of a threat the Belmonts were as well. Instead of outright engaging with them, Dracula saw greater advantage in having the humans destroy each other, hence Carmilla's suggestion. This is the witch hunts that forced Isaac and his sister to flee their home, which was most likely destroyed and their parents killed as a result. The witch hunts that had Cypher's parents killed, as well as others with abilities like hers. And as many should know, the witch hunts that saw Dracula's wife executed as a witch, the spark that started Dracula's war with mankind. Now for the show. Let's say we do entertain the idea that the church is responsible for the burnings in Wallachia and the near extinction of the Belmont clan. You think they'd still be competent as an organization, given who Dracula is and that monsters are real in the world of Castlevania? Not according to Warren Ellis. This is another case of evil and stupid when it comes to modern writers on villains. In this case, it's not just one person, but a whole organization, and I'm supposed to take them seriously as villains. After season 1, the church became irrelevant and non-existent in Wallachia. We do not even hear what they were doing in other parts of Europe. As I just recalled, Dracula's army never even got that far for the church to take note of him. That or this show was too lazy to take these things into account and just brush them off, along with any mention of the Ottoman Empire. But the show is historically accurate, the Shirls keep saying. Get out of here with that cuck! In all sincerity, while the games also made no mention of the Ottoman to my knowledge, that in no way absolves this show of its blatant desecration to the established law. Now in season 3, there's a cult that were former Christians from what I remembered that now worship Dracula or that visit a creature hiding in their basement. Of course, we cannot forget Cypher's obnoxious statement that God hates her and her people. That and the books on penis enlargement. Now where God is concerned, if I'm being personally honest, if one goes with Eager's take on Castlevania, God is better off left completely ambiguous as the portrayal of the church was kept at a more neutral level along with the yet to be revealed details of the Demon Castle Wars. As for the non-Igarashi Castlevania games and Lords of Shadow, those hold a far more positive take on God and the Christian faith via their characters. Lastly is the supernatural elements. By removing these in the show, another fundamental part of Castlevania was also stripped away. I must mention Trevor Belmont, as in the show, he's just an ordinary human who happens to have a magically augmented whip. Even Dracula implies that his weapon is just human magic and he does not even possess any of the superhuman feats and abilities that made people fear the Belmont clan. His Curse of Darkness counterpart even has an ability that made him temporarily invincible, an ability I speculate that he learned from his mother. That alone should tell you just how powerful he really is, as Dracula himself had to send a horde of his best monsters along with his best Devil Forge master in order to kill Trevor before the man even entered Wallachia. Now another example would be Dracula's abilities. Wasn't it just convenient that he was starving himself for a whole year, which in turn diminished his fighting prowess, just so that the heroes could stand a chance, and even then he chose to give up and commit suicide. And Dracula's castle? That itself was a supernatural entity that answered only to Dracula, who was the very avatar of chaos. This show had no excuse to diminish the castle to just a scientific teleporting machine, and nowhere in the lore was Cypher and Alucard powerful enough to bring the castle to them. That was both a stupid and lazy attempt to wrap the story up. There's a good reason why this show is not even called Akumajo Dracula in Japan. Dracula himself was so powerful that even death, the Grim Reaper, answered to him, as did most creatures of the night that relish in their base nature. While I won't delve deeply into them, Dracula's presence and powers are far greater than the show made it out to be. He can do far more than just throw a single meteor, teleport, and have DBZ fisticuffs with Alucard. To add on to what Timmy Jimmy said in my Vampirism in Castlevania video, Dracula's transformation into an abomination ranges from an ectoplasm to a giant bat, a dragon, or some otherworldly blight of nature. It's to show that he's not human and instead a creature of darkness that must be destroyed. I cannot forget to mention that he unleashed a very powerful curse upon all of Wallachia and most likely the rest of Europe, moments before his death, as to show he was still a force to be reckoned with. A curse that slowly took root over the course of 3 years. Said curse is so powerful that it affected people on a spiritual level, fed on their darkest sins and brought them out to the forefront. It even affected individuals like Isaac on both a spiritual level and even a physical one, given that pieces of his armor were supernaturally infusing itself to his flesh. A physical symbolism that shows how severely broken and fragmented his sense of mental stability and humanity has become. Even Trevor could feel its power, and he is one of the few to naturally resist the curse due to his training, discipline, and strong Christian beliefs. Even then, he was not immune, as according to one comment I came across in passing, Trevor's more aggressive persona may be in part due to the curse's growing influence. It's why he chose to simply fight Hector before learning the full story of what's really happening. It's also in part, I speculate, why he travelled alone, as he did not want a skirmish to break about between him and any potential companions that came with him due to the curse. Now, I once speculated myself that the Netflix series would even adapt this, given the manner of Dracula's death. Of course, the show has a habit of teasing and antagonizing the fans, and when it's time to deliver, we are given something completely different. They call it subverting expectations. I call it a giant middle finger. In closing, by diminishing, altering, and even removing the elements that gave Castlevania its own identity, the Netflix show ends up being just another nihilistic, spiteful, degenerative, postmodern story that thinks itself more clever and deeper than it really is. And honestly, I am past tired of adaptations based on beloved properties trying to emulate Game of Thrones, yet its creatives lack both the effort and the talent to even try and put in half the work. I do not even want them to touch stories like Berserk, and in today's climate, I would never trust them with the work in question. In the end, if you, the creatives in modern entertainment, cannot or will not respect the source material when it comes to any adaptation, then you are not the one that should be working on the properties, regardless of who you are or what beliefs you hold. You may as well make your own if you think yourself so far above the work in question. But that would of course take effort and integrity, qualities Hollywood and their moronic lickspittles of every breed and variety have been lacking for a very long time now.